Hi, I'm Chuck Haley, and this is 9 O'Clock Church. So, let me give you a quick overview of what 9 O'Clock Church is about. Well, let me ask you this question first. Will Walmart become the next Amazon, or will Amazon become the next Walmart? I think they're both racing each other towards the ultimate, where they're going to have to become an online presence that happens to have a physical presence. You see what happens with Walmart. They want you to order from them, show up at their store, they'll bring it out to your car, you're gone. Amazon, they want you to order from them, they'll actually mail it to you, or you show up at Whole Foods and then your wallet's gone. But I think that Amazon's going to win this race. I could be wrong. There's a whole lot of Walmarts around, and I don't think they'll ever go out of business. But people have gotten used to this virtual reality. We sit at home as we go to work. In our pajamas, we have our meetings at work. We have our sales calls, our Zoom meetings, all of our they're all done over the internet now. But if we need, there's usually a brick and mortar somewhere that we can go to and meet at. It seems to me that the church should probably, to some extent, follow that model. And so 9 O'Clock Church is, at the time, a virtual church. 9 O'Clock Church has as its model that we will gather on 9 o'clock over the internet and hear a sermon. I'm going to try to keep them short, 10, maybe 15 minutes. That will also allow you to have the rest of the day free. Now, this is what I think about Sunday. Sunday is our Sabbath, it's our day of rest, and it is set aside as a very biblical concept to have that day to spend with those you love, to be refreshed and regenerated so that you can go back to work the following day and earn your living. 9 O'Clock Church has two purposes. One, we want to make sure that you have your Sabbath set aside as your Sabbath, and this is not just another day to rush from this classroom to that pulpit and then try to beat the Methodists to Shoney's. That's not what we're about. Also, we have the concept of oikos. Oikos is the Greek word that means family, and it means more than just the family you're born into. It also means your extended family, the family you choose, the people you love, you spend your time with, that live near you. This is your oikos. Now, we have other concepts and other things that we promote, but those are the two things that pretty much set us apart from other churches around. Now, we do hope to meet each other. Probably in early summer, we're going to start having Wednesday night live chats via Facebook. Somebody has to teach me how to do that, but we'll get on it. Also, we hope to have a couple of interest meetings. Those will happen probably at a restaurant somewhere. We'll have a couple in July, one in August. And then we hope to meet everybody on September 25th and have just one big mass meeting, and we'll deal with the details of that later. Now, those all seem like things that are just so far down the road. And for you, they are. For me, I'm working on them already. But I'd like you to have that just as an overview of what 9 O'Clock Church is and will be. I'm also going to start on a new series from Nehemiah. In fact, last week's was our introduction. Today I want to give you an overview. You've had the overview of 9 O'Clock Church. Here's the overview of the book of Nehemiah. Now, the book of Nehemiah occurs about 1,000 years after the death of Moses, about 400 years prior to the birth of Christ. And the book of Nehemiah takes place at a very pivotal time in the history of the Old Testament. Now, before this, the two sections of Israel were destroyed. The section of Judah, gone. Israel, gone. The nation is no more. Isaiah would be considered like the precursor to Nehemiah. When they get to Babylon, and the reason they get to Babylon is because the king of Persia, the king of Babylon, says, I'm going to conquer Israel, I'm going to take back the best and the brightest. And he goes back for the next group, and the next group, and the next group, and pretty soon the only people left are the ones who, well, they're not the best and the brightest. But he has everybody else with him in Jerusalem. Some of them settle down to make a living. Their lineage is still there today. Others said, this is not our home. We want to get back to the promised land. We want to get back to Israel. And so plans were made. Now, with Ezra, he goes to the king and he says, King, I want to go back to Jerusalem and I want to rebuild the temple. And the king, of course, says, but aren't things good for you here? Now understand, during this time, the Babylonian capture, during that time is the book of Daniel occurs, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, right? Fiery furnace, all that. Also the book of Esther, that occurs. This is this young Jewish woman who grows up and marries the king of Persia. That happens during that time. So there's a lot of stuff happening among the God followers there during the time of Ezra. And Ezra says, King, I want a chance to go back. I want to rebuild the temple. And the king says, okay, here's money, here's people, here's passports, go have fun. It's more complicated than that, but this is the overview. They get there, they rebuild the temple. After they've rebuilt it, some of the men, the ones that are more than 70 years old, obviously, they stand around and they weep bitterly and say, this is not the place we remember. This is not as big as it used to be. But as long as we're here, let's worship our God. So they made a home for themselves. 15 years later, Nehemiah is in front of the king. He says, King, I got this problem. Now listen, Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer. In England, jolly old England, they used to have a beef eater. And the beef eater was actually somebody who would go before the king and eat his food out of his plate, drink out of his cup, and they'd all just kind of stand and stare and wait to see if he died. And if he didn't die, the king could eat. Same thing in Persia, only this time it is Nehemiah, and his title is the cupbearer. So he drinks from the cup, he eats from the plate, and they stand around and they watch, and if he's looking okay, then the king eats. This one day, he looks up, and now Nehemiah is looking really sad and kind of sour. And the king's like, should I be eating this? Nehemiah, talk to me. And Nehemiah says, that temple, that Jerusalem, that Israel, that stuff, remember that? Yeah. I want to go back and I want to rebuild the wall. Now, this is not the first time someone tried to rebuild the wall. We have a reference in Ezra chapter 4, verse 6, where we know that 75 years prior to that, somebody else tried to build the wall and they failed. So this is going to be a difficult task. But the king says, you know what? You're a good guy. I like you. I'll do it, but you got to come back when you're done. So here's some money, and here's some people, and here's your passports. Stay away from Atlanta. It's a madhouse there. He didn't say that part. But he did say, here's some money, here's some people, go build your wall. And he did. Of course, it's more complicated than that. And we'll get to that in the weeks to come. But he builds his wall, because as long as the wall is in rubble, the people are in trouble. And Nehemiah goes there to help rebuild a place where the nation can have an identity, where the people can worship, where they can be restored spiritually and physically, when they can then continue to move on in worship of their God and King. So that's the overview of Nehemiah. And that was the overview of 9 O'Clock Church. And I'll see you next week.